Hi, everyone. Thank you for being part of this process. My name is Julie Eshleman. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at Georgia Institute of Technology, and I'm going to walk you through the high-level findings of a scoping review of literature that I did on AI-Powered Assistive Technologies, or AIAT. So my goal for this presentation is to look beyond the general hype surrounding artificial intelligence, and I need your help to critically examine the real-world benefits and risks, understand the structural barriers dictating who actually gets access to these tools, and identify critical gaps in the current discussion and policy landscape. These gaps and tensions are going to serve as the starting point for my Policy Delphi study. So let's start by defining AIAT. When I use this term, I'm referring to tools that use AI to make communication, mobility, learning, and daily living tasks easier, more accurate, or more accessible for disabled people. And because of the impact these tools have on the daily lives of disabled tech users, I am arguing that access to these kinds of tools is not just a nice-to-have luxury, it is infrastructure for disabled people to engage with their communities and to take care of themselves. When I conducted this scoping review of 17 papers, I broke my findings down by the benefits and risks of AI-powered AT to disabled people, the equity issues that can serve as barriers or facilitators to access, and the policy mechanisms that could be used to influence the benefits and the risks. So let's start with the benefits. This broke down to three bigger categories, which were autonomy, which is all the ways that AI-AT can make daily living tasks faster, easier, or more accessible for all tech users. Access, which described how communication supports like AAC devices with predictive language models could enable access to better communication and learning experiences. And then general inclusion, which encompassed how these tools can facilitate better employment outcomes, improved productivity in tasks that would otherwise be impossible or difficult, and more social engagement and belonging. Now, on the other side, there's a lot of coverage in the literature about the risks. Every paper I reviewed included some discussion of privacy and security concerns, with another majority of papers discussing bias and discrimination, mostly focused on non-representative data sets that are used in training models, and the issue of reliability, safety, and accuracy, specifically what happens when AI-powered AT hallucinates and fails the user. Among these known benefits and risks, equity is not automatically built in. There are a lot of elements that influence the access to AIAT and therefore the magnitude of those benefits and risks. Infrastructure barriers included things like broadband access, a reliable power grid, and access to actual devices themselves. Cost barriers referred to a lack of funding for both research and development, as well as high costs and lack of coverage for purchasing the devices. And then finally, there was a fair amount of coverage of the need for usability and skills. So in communities without a knowledge and support infrastructure, people are much less likely to have access to and be able to sustainably use AIAT. But there are key ideas in the literature outlining how to improve equitable access to AIAT. Those discussions included improved resourcing to reduce the general financial precarity of disabled people, which would then give them more resources to access technology to serve as support tools. Capacity and support came up quite a lot. While the absence of a knowledge infrastructure was a clear barrier to access and adoption, investments in that human capacity showed to be a very effective facilitator to adoption and use of AIAT. And then finally, the participation of disabled people in the design and development and implementation of AIAT dramatically improves community acceptance and trust in those technologies, and also has that added benefit of investing in the knowledge infrastructure at the same time. Policy serves as another layer that can amplify or mitigate the different risks, benefits, facilitators, and barriers impacting equity of access. So there are two kinds of policies that influence how AIAT is accessed and used: incentive-based mechanisms, or carrots, and deterrent-based mechanisms, or sticks. Incentives for improving equity of access include things like financial subsidies to help people innovate to develop these tools and for people to financially access them, market-shaping incentives that improve processes to get AIAT to markets, and investment in capacity building, both from a built infrastructure perspective as well as a professional and cultural perspective. The sticks, or deterrents, include things like minimum accessibility and interoperability standards, or having governance and oversight mechanisms with defined enforcement processes, and structuring conditional market access based on things like disability co-development, accessibility standards, or other minimum standards that are imposed on new products. I know this is very small and I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I want to focus on the big picture that this tree map is showing, which is a distribution of topics across the scoped literature that I reviewed. So the size of each box represents how frequently a specific topic was discussed in the research, and the colors group them into our core themes. So the large red section is the equity barriers, and as you can see by the sheer size of those boxes, researchers have spent a massive amount of time talking about what is blocking access. The yellow section at the bottom left represents the benefits. This is also a huge area showing the positive impacts on mobility navigation and communication access. Now, the orange section in the upper middle highlights the risks, and the blue section on the top right shows the equity facilitators, or things that are helping people to gain access. But I'd really like to draw your attention to the bottom. So the bottom center section, the green one, represents deterrent-based policies, and the purple section in the bottom right corner represents incentive-based policies. So I think the final takeaway here is the size difference. The literature spends a massive amount of time admiring the problems and praising the technology, but the green and purple policy sections are noticeably smaller. So the actual policy mechanisms that are needed to govern AI-AT are significantly under-discussed. And that discrepancy represents the gap that I'm trying to fill with this policy Delphi study. So here is the mission. If you are 18 or older, living in the United States, and have expertise or lived experience in disability or policy or technology or advocacy, I would really love for you to contribute to this conversation. Participation would involve a voluntary round zero interview with me to determine some of the highest priorities, followed by up to 3 rounds of surveys that would capture the importance and relevance of these discussions. So if you're considering participating, especially in a round zero interview, then in addition to the prompts on this slide, I'd love for you to think about what else needs to be discussed in terms of how the different policy mechanisms available to us may magnify or mitigate the risks and benefits of AI-AT and influence access. What is still missing from this conversation? Last, if you are game to participate, then you can scan the QR code on the left side of the screen to read the participant information sheet for more details. If you have any questions or you'd like to volunteer for a round zero interview, you can scan the QR code that's on the right, and that will send an email to me. And either way, you could just email me at jeshleman7@gatech.edu. Thanks so much.